Well, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, I just want to say thank you for attending today's EnRoute webinar. Today, Aaron Clapp is our presenter, and many of you probably know Aaron. He's in charge of all the training here at SAI, and he's been working with EnRoute for years and knows it inside out and backwards. And today, he's going to be talking about how to set up a Dragknife in EnRoute. And so he'll go ahead and show you all everything he knows about that. And then after his presentation is over, we'll open it up for some questions. You can just go ahead and type them into the chat window on the bottom there. And they can be about Dragknife, or they can be about any other questions you've been working on in EnRoute, or things you'd just like to learn a little bit more about. And he'll answer as many of those as we can. And let's see, we will be recording today's webinar as usual, and we'll post that up to the SAI YouTube channel after it's over. So if you want to review it or share it with anyone, we will email you a link to the webinar recording after it is done. And with that, we will turn it over to Aaron.
All right, sounds good. So today we want to talk about setting up a Dragknife tool. So specifically, this is a specific type of tool that we're looking at. And I'm just going to pull up the website of the company that we kind of modeled this after. So this is Donic Tools. Now I know there's several other companies out there that do make tools similar to this, but essentially what you're looking for is a tool that will mount directly into the collet of your spindle and has a rotating axis on it. So this this particular tool doesn't really work with oscillating knives or anything like that. This is more of a drag knife style, kind of like you'd have in like a vinyl cutter or something like that. It's important that this head be able to rotate around. And so Donic is one of the creators of some of these tools. You can also find other ones. They will work as well as long as they have that swiveling axis. So we'll address this here later, so I'm going to pull that up in a minute. But the first thing that we want to do is talk about how to set it up. In EnRoute, the newest version of EnRoute, EnRoute 6.1, we have added the ability to create a Dragknife tool. So if we go to our setup menu and click on Tool Library, we can now create a new tool and select our Dragknife. Once we do that, we get this set up right here. So I have my Dragknife selected here, and essentially what we're doing here is we're defining the H1 value as the height of the cut, so the height of our cutting blade. We're defining the angle at which that is at, and then the D1 is the offset from the tip of the blade to the center of the rotation point. So this is going to be important to know. And again, a lot of that information is right here. If you're purchasing one from Donic, they will have a lot of this information already for you. So for example, you've got for the D1 and the D2 and the D3 and the D4, they've got all of their offset values already predefined for you. So just know that these are available here and you can access some of these tools. But if you're using a different size of blade maybe or something like that, you will need to calculate what that center offset is so that when we create the toolpath, the software is actually creating the correct toolpath for that particular blade. So let's go ahead and close out of here. I'm going to leave this as my default setting. One thing that's also going to be important is before we actually get into toolpathing is
We're just wondering about tangential knives.
Tangential knives? No.
Yeah.
It's a free swivel knife. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
And so one of the other things you're going to need to know is also you'll need to turn off your spindle speed. So inside of the toolpath, there's going to be some settings, but the first thing that you're going to want to probably do is go to your setup and machine setup menu. And depending on what driver you're using, you're going to want to probably go into the driver speeds and make sure that your spindle speed here is set to 0. What this does here is this actually is a default setting, and it's mainly used for if you don't put in a spindle speed for like an end mill or something, then you have a default value in there. But when you're using a Donic tool, you definitely don't want EnRoute overriding a no spindle speed with a spindle speed. So make sure that this is set to 0 when you're using one of these free swivel drag knives. Now that we've basically done this, uh, now we can actually start looking at the tool paths for one of these Donic style tools or one of these drag knives. Let's start out with a simple shape here. We've got a square, and I'm going to go to my toolpath menu, and I'm going to select my new drag knife cut. When I select this, I can come in here and select my drag knife tool. I can set in whatever depth of cut that I want. And then we're going to look at some of these variables down here. But for now, we're just going to leave it at lift corner and align. These are going to be two options that are selected by default. And we'll kind of go over these in a second. But we're just going to apply it. And it's going to give us some interesting looking tool paths. And the reason why it's doing this is because it's a drag knife and not a tangential knife, it needs to be able to correct course for the bit in its movement. So you're going to see some interesting things in here, like these tool paths here. One of the things to remember is going to be that the tool path that you see here is not the actual cut path, but it's actually the path of the center of the head, the spindle head. And so when we look at how, for example, it starts, is we're going to see, like, for example, this corner. Let's look here. As the drag knife travels along this end, it's cutting straight, and then to get to this corner, it's going to overshoot it just a little bit, and the distance of this overshoot is going to be defined by the offset. So the larger the offset from the center of the drag knife to the center of rotation, that's what this is going to be right here. And so technically, when the center of the spindle gets to right here, the tip of the blade is actually back here. And as it does this, it actually lifts up the blade just a little bit, just enough so it's barely touching the material, so that when the CNC head makes this rotation movement right here, it actually turns the blade so that it's pointing the correct direction. Then when it gets to this point, it moves forward and continues on its cut. And then it continues to do the same thing in this corner. So when you see these toolpath, they are going to look a little strange, but just remember what it's actually doing is it's calculating for deflection of the bit or of the blade and all kinds of things. So as we look at some other examples, you're going to see as it goes around arcs, some of the arcs it'll follow closely, and then some of the arcs it's going to carve out and in a little bit. You'll see it do some weird things, but we'll kind of define that here later. So let's go over some of the settings in this here, and then we'll look at some more complex examples. So by default, you want to have the align selected. And what this alignment does is it sets the flatness of the tool path. So this means that as it comes into the corner, it's going to perfectly line up flat with this corner here and move on. I can choose, instead of a line, I can also choose to radius the corner off. If maybe I don't want that sharp corner and I'd rather the bit just not stop and do that whole lifting motion, I can have it round off that corner for me, and I can define my radius. The other setting here towards the top, and note, just as a setting here, this is all for inside corners. If we scroll down a little bit, you'll see in green here that these are the settings below for outside corners. So what is this lift? This lift corner is important. Typically, this setting is going to be anywhere from 0.01 to 0.03, depending on the levelness of the surface of your table. And as you become more comfortable with it and what material you're using, you may want to adjust this up and down. But a good setting is usually anywhere between 0.01 and 0.03. What this does is it pulls the bit out in the corners so that it's far enough out that it's still touching the material, but it's still touching the material in so that when the bit does its rotation, like we see down here in this corner here, as it does its rotation, it allows the knife to move, because remember that knife is on a rotation. It's a free spinning bit. So as it rotates, it's going to move the cutting blade into the correct position. So again, this is going to make a little bit of a difference depending on the type of material you're cutting and whatnot. You kind of play around with that setting, but you want it to make sure that you're still touching the material as it makes that movement. Otherwise, it won't align your blade properly as it makes that corner. So again, I can assign a radius corner. I'm going to just leave that aligned. And for our example with the square, I'm actually going to go to the outside corner section, and I'm going to say radius corner. I'm going to set it to 0.25 inches and hit OK. And we'll see what difference it makes here. So here you can see that as we come to this corner, instead of just making a direct 90-degree turn, it's coming out here not quite as far. So your tip of your blade is probably going to be somewhere over here, wherever that 1/4 inch is going to be. And then it starts making its sweeping movement. So as it comes along right here, our true cutting is, our blade is probably going to come in here and make this cut like that. So just be aware that that's how the radius corners works. This gives you a little more of a free movement. This is going to be a little bit faster. So if you're concerned about speed more than anything else, you might want to use the radius corners instead of having the machine stop, pick up, make the movement, plunge back down, and then keep running. But if sharp corners are your need, then you'd want to use the align option. Let's go back in here, click edit, and we're going to go over this other setting. Now this can only be done on outside corners, but you can loop your corners if you want to, and your loop standoff, we'll define that here in a second. We'll leave it at 0.5. You can change this to whatever you want it to be, but let's hit OK. And what this does, and I know this is going to look a little bit weird, but again, we're not following the tool. The tool is not making this path. This is the head of the bit, or the head of the machine, making this path. So as we come along here, if we were to measure this distance from here, from this corner, all the way to this outside loop, this would be your 0.5 inches. So if I come in here and make this smaller, now this gets shorter. So as it's coming along here, it's creating a looped corner so that the tool will actually come around and then continue. This again is just another method of creating a non-stopping point, so that as it moves, it's just simply making a rotation as it cuts along. So you can avoid that potential issue where you have to stop, pick up the bit, rotate it. It does obviously create problems with nesting, things like that, where you're going to have to, think about how much extra space it's going to use, but that's going to be that distance right there. And so it's just going to loop around and come back up, and it'll do that with all these corners. So let's just take a look at something a little bit different. Let's throw a toolpath on here. And let's go back and remove these, and we're just going to go back on align on both of these and just take a look here. So again, we have a lot of the same things going on here, where we've got the bit coming back, but then if we look here at our arc here, we've got a a spot here where it overshoots it just a little bit and then makes a change in the direction here. So again, in order to make this arc possible, the head of the bit or the head of the machine needs to go a little bit beyond in order to make that curve. And so that's what this is for here. So you'll see this again with a lot of your different tool paths. So let's just do this S, for example. Again, as we look at this, our start point is up here, starting up here, plunging it in and making sure that we're correcting for the bit, and then following this. And as you can see, as we follow this, this tool here has got a nice little arc to it on the outside. Again, this is all based on the arc. So as it moves along, it's going to be cutting in at some point right here. In order to make this arc, it has to cut on the inside and move in. So as it transitions, you're going to see a lot of this, and there's going to be, it's going to be weird to look at, but remember, this toolpath is always in relationship to the center point of that rotation for that drag knife. So if we were to edit this toolpath and come in here and decide, well, let's do inside radius corners at 0.125, and let's also do outside corners at radius 0.125. Note that when you click the radius corner, the align turns itself off. You can't have both. It has to be one or the other. And so now we can see it's changed some of our tool pathing just a little bit here on the corners and whatnot. If I come to a spot where I say, okay, this tool path doesn't, I want to modify where the entry exit is going to be, I can easily do that. I'm going to clear off my tool path, and I can tell software, I'm going to go to my edit points. I'm going to select this shape. I'm going to select this box here, or maybe even select here, or maybe one of my corners, just highlight it, right click on it and say set start point. So now that's my new start point. If I go to my drag knife cut and do a line to make these look a little easier here. Now down here is going to be my new start point down in this corner. And obviously it has to do some things here to kind of line up the bit in order to make that correct cut here. But this is the drag knife tool. So again, this tool is in EnRoute 6.1 and newer. Also, be aware of some tips here for you. Make sure that you know the diameter and you've got that all set up correctly inside of your tool library. So setup menu, tool library, make sure that you have this set correctly. So per this manufacturer's specifications or through their website or whatever this is, you can also measure these manually. Make sure that this is set up correctly, because if this is not set up right, your angles and all this, it will throw off the way that your Donic tool or your drag knife tool will work. Then the next thing you need to remember is go into your setup menu, machine setup, and make sure that your spindle speed is set to 0. The last thing you want is your spindle starting up at 12,000 RPM with the spinning blade. That's probably not a great idea. So make sure you come in here and set this to 0 as well. And then when you apply your toolpath and edit your feeds and speeds, we don't allow you to put a spindle speed, so you'll just see the feed rate and the plunge rate. And then just remember that if you want, depending on the material, you're going to set your lift corners. You should always have the lift corners usually turned on. Otherwise, you're not going to get that. You're going to get what happens to a lot of drag knife type vinyl cutters is you might get a little loop or a little funny cut right here at your corners. So make sure you do have that lift set. with a setting between the tolerance of 0.01 and 0.03. But play around with it and kind of see how that works. But that's essentially the Donic tool, or the Dragknife tool. It's how to set it up, how to use the toolpath, and how to kind of get results with this. This is going to be a great for using for cutting cardboard, vinyl, leather, all kinds of different things like wood laminates or things like that. Anything that can be cut with one of those utility style blades can be used with this tool. If you're using, and I know that people mentioned the tangential knife, your tangential knife works completely differently. So I'll just briefly mention that. Usually a tangential knife, you're going to use an engraved toolpath. And depending on your machine, if it requires special codes and things like that, you may need to contact us in terms of how we support those. Or if we support it for your machine, that would be a tech support question, but give us a call and let us know. But a lot of those tangential knives just run off of a standard. They have a specific tool number that they use on your machine, and they just use a standard engraved toolpath. So I would take this shape here, go to toolpath, and select engrave, and that will make it follow the line exactly, because a tangential knife works based on a completely different principle than a drag knife does. This is mainly a solution for those who don't have a tangential knife on their machine, but still want to put something in their machine that just works off the main spindle. Any questions on this or any other part of the EnRoute software?
A couple questions during it. Dan said it looks like it's
Um,
correct
yeah, we
for
do.
rotation on start. Is that correct?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And Grant said, when you were talking that last part, it said 0 on the spoil or on top of material. Is there a preference?
Probably going to be on the. Well, actually, I don't think it really matters. If I were to say anything, I think that kind of uses the same methodology that you'd use for any other tools. If you're scoring the top of the material, you may want to use surface at top of plate. But if you're just cutting all the way through, surface at bottom of plate would probably work as well. So, yeah, I don't think there's a necessarily preference. But if you're not going all the way through the material and you're scoring it, that might be where surface at top of plate would probably be more efficient in that case.
Okay. And,
One Grant also asked about the creasing tool.
mhm.
We don't have support for the creasing tool yet, but that is something that has been mentioned, and wanting to get support for that as well. So that actually may come down later on down the road, um, but it would it would it would use a significantly different tool path, and I think that's why we haven't added it yet. But it would definitely be something that we've actually already talked about maybe adding in, just because it's on our radar there.
Okay. And Dan said, this is a great addition to your software. The Donix software was very difficult to use, at least for me.
Great. Yeah, this is. We thought it was gonna be a good addition. It Again, we kind of wanted to put a webinar out there. We're probably gonna also make a video on this a little bit as well. These toolpaths can look a little crazy and a little bit weird, but we want to kind of spread the word and kind of get people to kind of see what it's about and how it works, so that it's not so eye shocking. Because if you're coming from a CNC world, something like this, it's like, what is it doing? So yeah, we definitely want to kind of make sure that we understand why it's doing these types of movements.
Okay. And then we had a couple people wanted to clarify that this is on EnRoute 6.1,
It
right?
is on EnRoute 6.1. I believe, if I'm correct, you have to be 6.1 on a subscription, I believe is what this is. So as long as you have a subscription and you're on 6.1, you'll have access to this. If you have a subscription and you have EnRoute, and you're not on 6.1, easy way to get that is just go to saicloud.com. You can log in, re-download EnRoute. One of the things that I would recommend that you do is EnRoute is not really good at, it's notorious for not only saving your preferences if you do an overwrite install. So when you do the install, just make sure and save it in a different folder. If you see my C drive, I have all mine installed in different versions and things like that. So just give it a slightly different name, install it in a new folder, and then you can use the handy help menu and say restore settings from a previous version, and you'll get this window pop up right here. And then I can just select what folder, uh, preferably my older version of EnRoute that I was using, and hit OK, and it'll transfer all of my preferences over. My driver, my tool library, my strategies, everything will come over, and so then you won't lose any production or anything that way. So yeah, if you want to get 6.1, go to the cloud, download it from your account, install it in a fresh new folder, go to that help menu, transfer those preferences over, and you'll be set. So 6.1 on a subscription is the key there.
Okay. Let's see. People were wondering about seeing the recording of the webinar, and we record all the webinars and then post them to our YouTube channel, and we will send out an email with the direct link to the channel. And let me just type in the address here. And while I get that address, Aaron, do you want to talk about the one-on-one training?
Yeah, definitely. So we do offer one-on-one training. In fact, I've got our website pulled up here. So if we go to thinksai.com, you click on support, click on EnRoute, and then click on training and events. It'll pull you up to this page here, and then all you have to do is click on here, and then you can get to our page where it shows you the training, and there's also a form you can fill out if you want to have somebody get in contact with you. We sell them in 2 and 4 hour blocks, so if you want to purchase some training, we do these sessions in 1 hour sessions, and then we do a very similar thing as we do here. We do a team viewer session on your PC or mine, and then we record the entire session. And then you get that recording later. And we can talk about whatever topics you like. So if you're new to EnRoute, or if you have a specific type of file, or you want to learn more about 3D, or if you would like to learn how to use the ATP or any feature about EnRoute, we decide that we customize the training to the topics that you guys want to talk about. So it's really worth it, and so check it out. That is our new training that we offer for EnRoute. This is for EnRoute and for Flexi, so we do it for both.
Okay, wonderful. And I posted the link to the YouTube channel there as well, and we will send you an email, and that has all our past webinars as well. So if you want to brush up on any other topics that we've covered, we've got all of them listed there. So you can review any of the other EnRoute webinars that we've done, and we will send you an email as soon as today's webinar is posted as well. It looks like we have one more question. Samantha said, I have a tangential vinyl knife that does not attach into the spindle, and my cam guy always has to reset the home for the knife. Is there anything I can do on my end to do that for him?
I think this kind of depends on the machines and how their tangential knives are handled. Some machines have the offset already pre-built into it. So based on the tool that you're using. So for example, I don't have a specific manufacturer, but I've seen where if you use like T99 or T32 or some specific tool number, it activates a specific setting inside the machine that then offsets it because it knows that that's the tool that you use for the tangential knife. Some machines don't have that though, however. It's just a generic setting. And so with your particular machine, it may that may be just the process that machine has to go through in order to get it to work that way. I do know some machines do store that offset though, similar to how a drill bank would work with the spindle. It knows the distance between the spindle and the drill bank. Uh, so I think that's kind of a machine specific one. But if that's the process they're having to use now, I would assume uh, that it's because the machine doesn't know the offset from the spindle.
Okay, she said, I figured that much. I just had to ask in case there are any toolpath settings for me to set the home. Thank you.
Yeah, not that I know of. We don't have anything that would do that. Mostly, you just want to set the home from the machine side because mostly that's controlled by the machine end. So,
Okay. Well, looks like that's all the questions. Unless anyone else has any other questions that they'd like to ask Aaron about EnRoute today. Okay. And thank you everyone for coming. Just want to let you know we will be having our next EnRoute webinar on February 18th, and we'll be talking about using the new ordering tools. And we'll send you all an email with an invitation to that webinar and a link to register. And we will see you all next month. Thank you so much.
thanks.